Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Sarah Avery, and I am the Executive Director of Quanta Change. And what I want to talk about today is something that I get asked about all the time because it seems so mysterious. So I'm curious, do you ever feel like nothing works for you? Like no matter what you do or how hard you work, that you just aren't getting the results that you really ought to from the efforts you're putting in? Well, if so, you're not alone at all. If that doesn't resonate for you personally, I hope that what I have to say today is going to help you understand someone close to you, maybe a friend or a family member, maybe a coworker. So I hope it's helpful in that way. So if this does sound like you, if this does sound familiar, the first thing that I want you to hear is that it is not your fault that it's been happening, and it's not your fault that you haven't been able to change it. So you're not choosing to have things go wrong. You aren't attracting that. You're not doing something to make it happen, and it's really just not your fault. It's the reason you haven't been able to address this is because you haven't been able to get to the source of the issue that's trapped inside of you, and really address it. So I'm going to talk more today about what that is and how you can do that. But in the meantime, I'm curious about some things. Have you been feeling this way for a long time, that nothing works for you? Has that been your experience for a long time? Maybe since your late teens, early 20s, maybe even further back? If so, that points to you having a survival mechanism that really has allowed learned distress to run amok in your life. And I will explain more about what I mean about that. Or are you the kind of person for whom things worked pretty well for a long time? And then something shifted, something changed, and things became more of a struggle. Um, Things maybe stopped working the way they had. So if so, that points to you having a survival mechanism that kept learned distress under control for a long time, but then the learned distress started to overwhelm your survival mechanism. And I will explain what I mean by that just in a second. But I'm also curious if you've experienced this feeling that nothing works kind of across the board in your life, in kind of all areas of your life, or it's just maybe happened in one or two areas of your life. Maybe your relationships work great, things in your personal life are fine, but in terms of work or achievement, that's a real struggle. Or maybe is it exactly the opposite of that? Work, achievement, getting things done, that's easy, but then relationships just seem like a real struggle for you. So it's very common either to see this across the board in your life, this nothing ever works pattern, or to only see it maybe in one or two parts of your life. And so your answers to all of these questions really point to which one of the learned distress patterns you have. There are 6 of them, and I will tell you more at the end of this video how you can find out which of the patterns you have. But in the meantime, regardless of which pattern you have, it is learned distress that has been causing things to not work for you. So learned distress is the Quanta Change term for the feeling that you absorbed very early in life that there's something wrong with you being just the way that you are. Learned distress has a couple of components to it. It has the raw feeling, this icky feeling that there's something wrong with you, as well as a survival mechanism your brain developed very early in life to allow you to handle that, to deal with it, or at the very least be able to keep getting out of bed every morning with the presence of this feeling that there's something wrong with you. And it's learned distress that your sense of self uses to automatically generate all of the negative situations and conditions and moments in your life beyond your rational input or control. I'm going to say that one more time. It is learned distress that your survival mechanism uses to automatically generate all of the negative patterns and situations and conditions that are going on in your life. And that's beyond your rational input or control that's happening. So depending on which pattern of learned distress you have, learned distress may have had pretty free reign in your life for a long time. So did you hear that phrase, there's something wrong with you, and feel, yeah, wow, I know that feeling. I've been immersed in that feeling my whole life, every day, all day long. If that's how you've been feeling, then again, your survival mechanism has been allowing that to happen, hasn't given you really much or any power to control it, to overcome it. And then your sense of self keeps churning out situations in which you feel that same way, in which you feel there is just nothing that's going to work for me. I had a client once who described that as trying to walk forward while having someone grab the back of their shirt and drag them backwards. Does that resonate for you? If so, I'm so sorry. And I know what that feels like too. So I can relate. And what I want you to know is, first of all, that's all the work of learned distress working in the background. And there wasn't something you could have done to change that or control it. And I also know how frustrating it is to hear people say, you should just work a little bit harder or do this other thing or try more. You just haven't been working hard enough, when you know that you have been working harder than anyone probably to try and get things to work despite this force kind of trying to drag you back, right? So I really know that you're working as hard as you can to make things work. And what I also want you to know is that I have helped lots of people with your kind of pattern really change this and really see things start to work for them. So there really is hope if this has been your experience. Or now, are you the other kind of person for whom things worked for a long time and then they kind of stopped working, or they got to be more of a struggle? So in this case, you probably spent most of your life doing all the right things. You put in the right amount of effort and things worked for you, right? So, and then did something shift? Something got more to be more of a struggle. Things stopped working the way they used to, even though you were doing all of the same things. If so, I really get how incredibly confusing that is. And I get questions about this all the time. Why did things shift? So I can explain why. So here's the thing. Learned distress, regardless of which of the 6 patterns you have, learned distress is rising in intensity in all of us all the time. And if you have the kind of pattern that has kept learned distress under control, think of yourself as standing at the base of a dam. Now, for yourself right now, when I'm talking about the dam, there's water in the dam, but the water in this case is the learned distress. And your whole life, you've been standing below the dam. What do you see when you look up at the dam? You see a great big wall of dirt or concrete, right? But you don't see the water, right? You don't see the water until it starts spilling over. And that's what started to happen with learned distress for you, is that it was under control for a long time, but has risen to a high enough intensity level that it's spilling over and starting to make things more difficult for you. So yes, what I'm saying is that the force that is causing things to have stopped working for you is learned distress trapped inside of you. It's been rising intensity over time without you knowing. Does that sound scary? Does it seem a little anxiety producing even? If so, I'm really sorry. I don't enjoy delivering that particular message at all. But what I want you to know is there is really a way to peel off layers of learned distress, to start scooping water out from behind the dam, so that you can really feel better. And people who have your kind of pattern, if this is you, what they tell me is it doesn't just go back to the way it used to be, where things used to work. Things actually start to work more easily even than they did back then. So that's the hope that I have for you today, if you're feeling a little scared or anxious right now about that. So Whether you've been feeling this recently or for a really long time, this pattern that nothing ever works, have you been trying to address the frustration and pain that comes out of that learned distress? Has it worked? If so, that's great. Maybe you've tried therapy or some kind of self-help work, energy work, meditation, maybe. If that's been working for you, if it's helping things work better, that's fantastic. If not, it's because the methods you've tried have not been able to access your sense of self to start getting learned distress out of there. And that is why Quanta Change works with your brain during sleep. Because two things: sleep is when your sense of self is getting recharged, and sleep is when this wall of resistance to change or protection around your sense of self is deactivated. So Quanta Change allows you to tell your brain while you're asleep that you want to recharge with your natural core well-being, this feeling at your center that you are just great being yourself, instead of recharging again, as it has been every night, with your learned distress. And as that happens, your brain peels off layers of learned distress permanently. Your natural well-being that at your core expands to take the place that that learned distress was sitting. Your sense of self has more and more well-being to draw upon to automatically generate situations and conditions and patterns, instead of using learned distress to generate those patterns. So you feel better, and your life really starts to work better and more easily than it ever has before. Or maybe things start working for you really for the very first time at all. So let me give you a couple of examples of what this is like. So I'll start with the example of someone for whom things have not worked for a really long time. So this is a client who had a kind of a complex situation. He was retiring. He was documenting his whole very complex job that he'd been doing for a very long time. He was training the 3 people they had hired to replace him to do this complex job. He was also purchasing a home for the very first time in his life, several states away, in the middle of a pandemic, with a skyrocketing housing market where bidding wars were happening all the time. If you are the person who feels like nothing ever works for you, does this just sound like a total recipe for disaster? It's a lot, right? So, and he had really a moment of panic, really, where he was faced with all of this, and that happens in the course of the change cycle, in the Quanta Change cycle, where a layer of learned distress comes up to the surface. You really feel it, and then in the course of the change cycle, that layer moved out, and he really just said, I'm just going to work through each of these things one by one. And he started to work through them, and he got them all done. And long story short, he's moved to his retirement home. He's retired. He's trained all the people. He's documented everything. He managed to get a house in the middle of a bidding war 5 states away. And he loves his life. And now he is enjoying everything new that's coming along, instead of seeing roadblock after roadblock, as he had been his entire life. So I think if he were here today talking to you, what I know he would say is, if this can happen for me, this can happen for you. Things really can get better. Let me give you one more example. This is the kind of person for whom things worked for a long time and then sort of stopped working. Remember that image of the dam holding back learned distress? So the biggest piece of learned distress that we all try to hold back, no matter which pattern we have, is the feeling that we don't matter. And so my client had seen the feeling that she didn't matter rise in intensity over the course of her long marriage. And more she felt like she didn't matter. There was nothing she could do to make herself matter to her husband at the time. And she finally divorced him. It was a couple years later, she started dating again. And the first time she dated, she'd already done quite a bit of unlearning around this I don't matter thing. And she started dating this guy, and she said, Sarah, it's really different. Like, he is showing me that I matter in a way that my husband never, ever did, even when we were first married. This is so different. And even though it was a lot different for her, she started seeing this very familiar pattern again of, oh, but I feel like I'm having to work too hard to make myself matter. Really having to work at it. She decided to stop dating that guy. She looked again. She started dating somebody else. This happens with Quanta Change, where you kind of take a step up. Something, a situation allows you to feel like, wow, I have unlearned a lot of learned distress. Oh, but I'm still feeling some learned distress, not as intensely, but it's still there. Then the next situation comes along and you get to see that even more learned distress is gone. So she started dating this next guy. She said, this is really different. He is showing me that I matter in ways that I'm not having to do anything to bring about. He's just doing this. It's kind of shocking even. It's really great. And that kept happening. The more learned distress that she unlearned, the more she felt like she mattered in relation to this person, and the more he kept showing her that she mattered more and more, and that's just kept going. So this is really one of the things that happens with Quanta Change, is that things keep getting better in a way that that we're having to work less and less hard for. And that's just a function of well-being generating situations instead of learned distress. So if this sounds like you, I hope you're feeling a bit hopeful today, because change really is possible. And if none of this resonated for you at all today, I hope that you've maybe thought of someone you know it does sound like, and maybe this has given you a bit more understanding of why things have been happening the way they have, or not working the way that they have for your acquaintance. And I hope that that's helpful. So if this unlearning thing sounds interesting to you, the next way to or the next step to take to find out more is to find out which pattern of learned distress you have. There are 6 of these patterns. They are the idealist, the perfectionist, the optimist, the caregiver, the defeatist, and the dictator. Sometimes I call that benevolent dictator. So the reason to find out this pattern is not just so you can dive into it or examine it more, dwell on it, try and figure out a better way to control it. That's not what Quanta Change is about at all. The reason you find out which pattern you have is that you can see, so that you can see what learned distress you're going to be getting rid of, to uncover your natural well-being at your core. That's who you really are. That is your uniqueness. And that's what allows your life to feel good and work well. So if you'd like to find out which pattern you have, you go to my website. You're going to be taking a free, in-depth, scientifically validated personality test that measures learned distress. And I'm going to graph it for you and send you a free report that shows you your pattern of learned distress, the way you've been surviving with it, that survival mechanism I've been talking about today, and how Quanta Change really can help you peel away layers of that pattern so that you can really feel much better. So in order to do that, you go to my website, Quanta Change, QUANTA change.com, and click on the free report button. And that link is in my bio and all the usual places. So I thank you so much again for joining me today. And I really hope that you have found this helpful. It's explained some things for you. And I just hope that you will join me again next week, where I explain another aspect of learned distress and how Quanta Change can really change that and help you truly feel good being you. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye-bye.